Oh, have you pinned it too? Oh, you guys are spaced out. So we're appreciating the Buddha's enlightenment today. This is the last day of our Rohatsu session, and I'm talking about the first 4 lines of the Genjo Koan by Dogen. So this translation we have is by Kaz Tanahashi, and it goes as follows. When all dharmas are Buddha Dharma, there are enlightenment and delusion, practice, life and death, Buddhas and creatures. When the 1,000 dharmas are without self, there are no delusion, no enlightenment, no Buddhas, no creatures, no life, and no death. The Buddha way transcends being and non-being. Therefore, there are life and death, delusion and enlightenment, creatures and Buddhas. Nevertheless, flowers fall with our attachment, and weeds spring up with our aversion. Wow. So, all dharmas means reality. Dharmas is one of those words that means different things in Buddhism. It means the teachings of Buddha, the actual teachings of Buddha, but it also means reality, phenomenology. The world we live in is Dharma. So we're talking about real things. All dharmas includes all religions. It's universal. All religions are about some salvation. Buddhism is about learning about delusion and waking up from delusion. That's the point. So this first line is actually establishing that the Dharma, this universal truth that Dogen is referring to, is the Buddha Dharma. He's talking about Buddhism as we understand truth, as we see it, as we teach about it. And in fact, I believe before the 19th century, there was no word called Buddhism. That was something that was made up by Western scholars. It was always referred to as Buddha Dharma. Buddha Dharma is the most fundamental Dharma. So this first line, you're talking about the way it is here, the way physical world that we live in. When all dharmas are Buddha Dharma, there are enlightenment and delusion, practice, life and death, Buddhas and creatures, Buddhas and sentient beings, enlightenment and delusion. All these differences in our world, so many differences. Oh my gosh. So then, in the second line, he goes on and says, when the 1,000 dharmas are without self, there is no delusion, no enlightenment, no Buddhas, no creatures, no life, and no death. So he's telling us here about freedom. He's telling us here about liberation. Freedom from what? Freedom from selfishness. Freedom from clinging to self. Freedom from self-centeredness. What is the self? We think we know what our self is. We don't really want to go into it too much. We have our thoughts, our feelings, our attitudes, our point of view. And we construct this self out of what in Buddhism are called skandhas: form, feeling, sensation, constructs, consciousness, the whole thing. Skandhas, we are constructed. We are put together selves that are put together. But that's not really what we see when we see ourselves. We see somebody that we think is real. And then we don't really see the Dharma, what's here. We don't see this because we are projecting. We see appearances, we see rupa, we see forms, we see the appearance of the forms, but we don't see the Dharma because we're in the appearance. Our projection, we are in our projection. Do you understand what I'm saying? We're always projecting. And our self is in the projection, in the knowing, in the wanting it to be the way we want it to be. Our projections are full of ourself. And so we are deluded about Dharma. We don't actually see Dharma. What we see is what we want to see, is an appearance, a mirage. We distort reality through our projections. Dharma is always here, and Dharma is the sacred nature of reality. It's always here. It's always been here. But it has no self in it. So it's interesting because the word that Dogen uses here, let me find it, if I can find it. Usually, this no self is translated in the Chinese characters as not self, but Dogen doesn't translate it that way. He uses a Japanese phrase. He says, ware ni arazaru, which means other than self. Dogen, he's rigorous. He wants concrete meanings. He's not talking about some religious doctrine. When we talk about no self and Buddha nature, it's almost like we create another idea of self, the true self, the Buddha nature. I have this true, I have it. You don't have anything. We don't have the Dharma has us. If we would just get out of the way. What is not self? What is not self is other than myself, and that's the Dharma. The Dharma has no self in it. Dharma doesn't care about my agenda, my wants, my desires, my expectations. Doesn't care. Doesn't have anything to do with that. And that's the point of waking up, is that we actually wake up. That this self that we have created is a delusion, is creating suffering. And the point is that we don't have to do this. We could actually see the truth of the Buddha Dharma, which is the spiritual reality right here. It has nothing to do with the self I've constructed. And if I could get out of the way, I could see this Dharma. I could see what is real and true and sacred. I could see you. When we see each other, isn't that the nature of a real relationship? To see the other as they are, without your projection in that perception. So, if we love the Dharma, if we love the truth, then the Dharma can teach us something, because we can receive it. We're open to receiving it. We can be humble enough to receive it. It's not what I know, it's being curious about what I don't know. To be enlightened is to be a part, to belong here in this Buddha Dharma. Something truthful, something real. Something religious. There's that word. We don't like the word. It's not possible to speak about religion without metaphysics. It's not just empirical. Science is empirical. Religion is metaphysics. When you talk about the other shore, you're talking about metaphysics. This is not empirical. Science can't prove that we can go to the other shore. Can't prove anything about enlightenment. That's a metaphysical notion. We have to take it on faith. We have to find out for ourselves. It's not physical. It's not a material reality. It's a spiritual reality. And so we say this this Dharma is unborn. It's not created, it's not destroyed. Deluded people create and destroy, enlightened people discover and engage. Things are real if we're not in them. And how delightful it is when we're not in them. Very refreshing. So now we get to, so in this line 2, the first line, Dogen's talking about the differences, and now he's talking about the absolute emptiness in the second line, what we refer to as shunyata. There's no differentiation here, no knowing, no, this is a formless form, sacred world. This world is sacred. And now, in the third line, he's going to bring us back to the integration of the two in the first 2 lines, the relative and the absolute, back into the Tao. So wonderful what he says here. It's just amazing. So I'll read it from the beginning again, and we'll get to the third line. When all dharmas are Buddha Dharma, There are enlightenment and delusion, practice, life and death, Buddhas and creatures, all the differences, all the dualities. When the 1,000 dharmas are without self, there are no delusion, no enlightenment, no Buddhas, no creatures, no life, and no death. Unborn, deathless. And then the third line, the Buddha way transcends being and non-being. Therefore, there are life and death, delusion and enlightenment, creatures and Buddhas. So here, Dogen is presenting the Buddha way. And the way this is actually translated is the Buddha Tao. And we now translate the Buddha way that way, because if you say Buddha way, it sounds like something really important in Buddhism, but actually we're talking about Taoism, which is part of our practice, part of our Zen tradition. Taoism is a part of it. And Dogen was steeped in Taoism and Confucianism. He studied in China. Taoism would have been equivalent to being in our culture steeped in a, scientific materialistic culture. And the Tao consists of polarities. And you see this dialectic running throughout Dogen's thought. He's rigorous. He's not a lazy thinker. He's not talking oneness, emptiness isn't some bland oneness. It's actually sharp. It's a dialectic of yin and yang. The movement and the movement, the breath of yin and yang. The moving out, the moving in. Creation, destruction. There's duality in non-duality. And I had the good fortune to study some Chinese medicine with a fellow in Oregon during the pandemic, and it just was incredible. We studied this sacred text in China called the Neijing, and it was very much rooted in Taoist thinking. Taoism is very old. It's an indigenous, feminine practice from China. And the Taoism is this it's something dynamic, it's not static. And so when we say Buddha Tao, we're talking about the dynamic nature of the Dharma. It's always moving, always a dialectic. You reach some point and then you jump off to the next one. Whatever point, wherever you reach, whatever completion you reach, then brings forth the next destruction. And there's no place you can say, I've arrived in Buddhism, I'm now enlightened, because we're always stepping off the pole. We have this koan, how do you step off the 100-foot pole? Well, first of all, you have to climb up the pole. You can't step off it unless you've climbed up the pole. But then once you climb up the pole, you have to step off it. And we're always stepping off to the next place. Whatever insight we have, whatever clarity we have, it's like, Joshu's koan. The monk comes to Joshu and asks him, Joshu asks him, have you had your gruel? We had a good gruel this morning with Julie. You're going to be known far and wide for your gruel, Julie. That was good. So Joshu asks the monk, have you had your morning gruel? And the monk says, yes, I have. So what's Joshu asking him? Have you climbed the pole? Have you gotten to the top? Are you enlightened? The monk says, yeah, I see the point. I actually have clarity. That's wonderful. We should all aspire to wake up in that way. And then so the monk he's good, he shows up. And then Joshu says, okay, go wash your bowls. Jump off the pole. How are we going to jump off the pole? That's our practice. First, we got to climb it, whatever the pole is you're climbing, and then step off it. So Taoism is about the movement of yin and yang, and one of the teachings in Chinese medicine, they have these beautiful terms. When the yin and the yang are in harmony, it creates organized illumination. Shen is the name for form in Chinese medicine. Organized illumination. That's just incredibly beautiful to me. That to think of ourselves as organized light. That's just, and then in Chinese medicine, they say the movement of yin and yang creates the time-space fabric of the universe, which is called qi. And we don't see about 96% of that. So what we actually perceive with our feeble senses is about 4% of that. So Taoism is full of these kinds of dualities. So what Dogen is saying is when we integrate the absolute and the relative, there is wholeness and separation. That's the non-duality includes the dialectic. So we are whole and we're separated. We're together and we're alone. There's this bittersweet quality of this path. We're all here enjoying each other, and pretty soon we're going to go home, and each of us will be alone. That's the bittersweet quality of our existential condition. That's what Genjo Koan is to open to the reality of what it is to be a human being here. Our tender hearts, sad and tender hearts. So there's a famous saying, first in Zen, says first, it's about this, what we're talking about here. So first there is a mountain, then there is no mountain, and then there's a mountain again. So first we see forms, we see appearances, we see the differences. We think the world is objective things out there. And then if we practice and see the Dharma, we get out of the way and actually see what's here. Has nothing to do, there's no forms here anymore. There's no you and me, there's no me in the world, there's just Dharma, other than self. Wow. No mountain, no self, no things. No separation. And then we practice more, we jump off that pole and we come back to our daily lives. We come back to, taking the kids to school, going to work, And there's a mountain again, but it's different this time. Not the same as before. And then there's this beautiful and important line at the end. It has to be here. And he says, nevertheless, flowers fall with our attachment and weeds spring up with our aversion. Boy, he's going to burst our bubble just when we thought we were getting it all down. Back come the emotions. Back come the feelings. Back comes our love-hate relationship with the world. You think enlightenment meant you're going to be happy forever and you're not going to have any problems? I'm sorry, not so. Flowers spring up with our attachment. We're still gonna do the things we do as human beings. We're still gonna have emotion. We're still gonna have grief. We're still gonna have problems. Yesterday, I spent the whole morning talking to the state of Illinois, trying to get a form filled out for the Zen Center, and it was like being in hell. It was awful. I was really frustrated and angry, and I'm thinking, God, I'm in sesshin, and I'm just like pissed off. I'm trying to be nice to this person on the phone, but I'm dealing with this bureaucracy, and it's just, oh. Well, maybe it would have been worse if I wasn't in retreat, huh? I would have had a real hissy fit. Been really bad to that person, but it was pretty bad. Flowers fall with our attachment. So that's our practice. That's a wonderful gratitude we have for having heard such a profound spiritual teaching that has been handed down to us, and it is our responsibility. It is our responsibility to clarify this for each of ourselves and to carry it on so that others can appreciate it too, because the world needs you awake. So where do you step after the Dharma, the Buddha Dharma? And where do you step after the Buddha Dharma? Emptiness. Where do you step after emptiness? The Tao. Where do you step after the Tao? Daily life. Go back to work. So at the end of the Heart Sutra, we have this rightfully called the supreme mantra. It is the supreme mantra. They're tooting their horn, whoever wrote the Heart Sutra, and they have a right to do it. It is a profound mantra. Gate gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. Gone, gone. Jump off the pole. Jumping off the pole. Jump off the jumped off pole. Just keep jumping. Amen. Hallelujah. Woo. Can I hear a hallelujah? Hallelujah. Oh, good. Amen. Yay! So, the dropped off body and mind, the dropped off body and mind. There is no end to how deep we can penetrate to the truth of the Buddha Dharma. And we have this incredible opportunity. Each of us has this life to clarify and to realize something that is profound and rare in our species. And we have the opportunity to practice together, to wake up, and to fulfill our bodhisattva vows to the best of our ability. So, the Tao may lead to completion, but then that just leads to another disturbance. That's the tension in our lives, existential condition. We can't get rid of it. We have to embrace it with grace, with humor. It's a cosmic joke. The joke's on us. Can we laugh? Can we laugh at ourselves? Can we laugh at how pathetic we can be? So, well, maybe we could have a little discussion about this or anything. Well, okay.
Okay. So in the beginning of the talk, you mentioned the corrupt world.
Yeah.
And then a bit later, we started talking about the sacred nature of reality. Between those two different ways of perceiving, I often get confused and lost. If I'm at home thinking, or, in my life thinking that the world is corrupt or whatever, I often think that that's my despair talking or my projection. But then if I perceive it as all is sacred, then I'm like, well, maybe I'm a little optimistically deluded. And so I'm having trouble understanding the
I think that's sort of the push and pull of the differences when you're in the place where you're thinking about enlightenment and delusion as two different samsara and nirvana, then we separate the two out and we're trying to reach nirvana. But when you go further into the clarity, you begin to see in the formless awareness, there is absolutely no differentiation taking place. So samsara is nirvana, and at that level, it's all sacred. Even the delusion is sacred. Nevertheless, we come back and then we integrate the two, and now we're beginning to work with delusion and sacredness, and we can see them in the world. We can see the sacredness, but we can also appreciate that there's a lot of suffering. We're not denying the suffering. And then the fourth line is really bringing us back to work, where we are living in this deluded world, but we can also, if we have the eyes and the heart to see, we can also see that it is fundamentally sacred and whole, and without enlightenment or without neither, there's no differentiation when you see the sameness. But then you can also come back and integrate the sameness and the difference, and now you see the sacred world, but you also see the corruption that takes place because people don't see that sacred world. They don't honor it. They don't. There's all kinds of samsara is it's based on ignorance. People aren't seeing this reality in front of them. They're seeing what they want to see. So yeah, it can be. I think it's useful to think about practice. When we do koan study, we have what we call Dharmakaya koans, where you're really appreciating the oneness, like a mu is a Dharmakaya koan. Bute's one finger Zen, that's a Dharmakaya koan. We're like really appreciating the oneness, where there is no differentiation, this formless awareness, formless form. And we see the sacred, but then we have to integrate that back with differences, and now we bring back form. We bring back, unfortunately, we bring back delusion, because that's also part of the world. When we integrate the two, then we have to work with the suffering that's here. We can't deny it. We can't say it's not real. At that level, it's real. There are real people getting killed and dying and starving in the world. And that's not a delusion, that's a reality. Yeah. So, all right. Anybody else? Anybody online?
For me, that last line kind of brings us back into the relative, right? Nevertheless, flowers fall with our attachment and weeds spring up with our aversion. Those are like two of the poisons, the poisons. So it speaks to me anyway of, you know, trying to be as skillful as you can in the relative world. And so how do you see, the question is, how do you see the absolute when you're in that situation? I mean, to
Well, you probably
help you be
don't.
more
You probably
skillful.
don't see if the absolute, we mean by the absolute the Dharma, we probably don't see the Dharma
Right, and
because
that's why
we get in the way.
we're in the way.
We get in the way. So the point here that Dogen is making, which is important, is that even though we can clarify the nature of, even though we can be enlightened and wake up and be free of suffering, be free of this self, see that this self is a construct that I've created that's the root of my suffering, and I can learn through practice to forget this self and then see the truth of the world that I'm in. Nevertheless, I'm going to forget about that, and I'm going to come back. I'm a creature of habits. I'm going to get upset with the person on the phone, and I'm going to get upset when you tell me to do something different that I've done, and I'm going to have a hissy fit because that's what we do. And then I'm going to remember, but I am going to not do that as long. I'm not going to torture you as long as I would. I'm going to realize that I projected something into the sacred space, and I'm going to, if I'm practicing, hopefully I'll eat the projection and take it back, and then we're good again. But we always speak of like absolute and relative bodhicitta. The absolute bodhicitta is the compassion is already here with the wisdom. It's organic. If you really see clearly the Buddha Dharma, then your heart is open here. It comes with that. So we call that absolute bodhicitta. And then there's all the skillful means, the upayas that we practice that are called relative bodhicitta. Because we're stubborn and we're creatures of habits, we don't always see that absolute. So we have provisional, skillful means to help us train to be more compassionate. And so all those practices are mind training slogans and things that remind us that we could be more compassionate, and we'll generally be happier if we are. Our lives will go better if we practice generosity and showing up here. So incidentally, one of the, when we talk about the paramitas, there's three kinds of giving. When we talk about dana paramita, dana traditionally means giving money to the monks at the monastery, or giving money to charity, or giving food or clothing. And then the second kind of dana is giving the Dharma, giving teachings. And then the third kind of dana, which I think is worth appreciating, is we can give no fear. When we are here without self, there is nothing there's no territory that needs to be defended, and we can be more skillful and we can be helpful for others. So one of the the most generous things we can do is when someone is in fear, when we have a friend that's dying or in fear, when we're dying, we lose track of our senses and get confused. And if you can be with someone with a calm and stable mind without fear, that is a great gift to the other person. In any situation where people are confused and fearful, for you to be, you know, it's like that whole notion of nirvana is like extinguishing the flame, extinguishing the grasping, the fire. And later on in the Genjo Koan, Dogen uses a lot of dualistic, different things like fire and ash. You say, well, what is we read that, you think, what's he talking about? And I think he's talking about fire is the anger. Fire is the way we burn things up with our passion and our wanting something to be a certain way. And ash, which we normally think of as not such a good thing, is actually the positive quality. Ash is, things grow out of ash, actually. Ash is the kind of having burnt out that passion. Now there's a kind of calm, stableness in that quality of ash. It's sort of like where Shanti Deva says, being patient, be like a block of wood. It's like not a great teaching in our culture where you think, be like a block of wood? That sounds really boring. It's a good thing sometimes to be like a block of wood. And so ash, I think, has that positive connotation for Dogen in the Genjo Koan as well.
So this feeling of an open heart seems to be I don't know if it's the generation of bodhicitta or a display. I mean, it is when the heart is open, bodhicitta is at play,
I think so.
basically.
Yeah.
And so when tears fall as a result, that's all good, right?
Yeah.
With joy, even with sadness, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting about emotion. I think it's possible it's a little complicated, but I think it's possible to speak of an emotion being true. It's the emotion without so much self in it, without the sentimentality. I think there's a kind of emotion that comes. It's one thing I noticed when I first started practicing, because I've always been a very artistically inclined person with lots of passion and emotions, and I was pretty hot-headed when I was younger. And one of the things I started to get when I was practicing was my emotions were a little different. They weren't. There was something truer about emotions when we're practicing, when the self isn't in the emotion. You still have the emotions, but I could call it truing the emotion, but maybe it doesn't make any sense to anyone else. But to me, there's a sense in which emotions can have wisdom, and when there's not so much self in the emotion.
That's a tricky one. I
That's a
like
tricky
that.
one, but,
I like
yeah.
that explanation there, or that example.
There's always a cognitive piece to emotion in Buddhism. They never speak of an emotion as being pure. So if your cognitive piece is a self-centered story, then the emotion is self-centered. But if you're letting go of the cognitive piece, or it's neutral, or it's like ash or wood, then I think the emotion comes up in a truer way, in a way that's a little cleaner. Doesn't leave the same kind of residue, if that makes any sense. You're not
That's
clinging.
hard, yeah.
There's not a clinginess to it in the way.
It just comes.
We
and
get
then
stuck very easily
we
with
get stuck.
emotions. That's
Right,
how we all get stuck. And then, we get hurt, we get stuck, we get angry. And, you watch little kids do this. They're not grown up yet. So they like, one moment they're angry and next moment they're laughing. And you think, how do they do that? I don't do that. I get angry, man. I'm gonna hang on to that. I'm gonna milk it for all it's worth. So yeah, I think bodhicitta is wonderful. It's really the heart of practice. It's what opens us up and brings a lot of joy and wonder and freshness to samsara.
I mean, it's always there, but when the heart opens, it's like it's breathing. Somehow you're breathing too.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of bodhicitta in your hula practice. Seems to be a lot of heart in hula. I see
Yeah,
it
I
in
feel
your,
like it
I see it in your
generates
hula school and your
bodhicitta.
students. They have a lot of generosity and just a lot of warmth. Yeah, I think it's part of the practice of doing hula that you're acting it out through dance. Yeah. Okay, anyone else? Yeah.
I'm kind of confused now with this
Okay.
emotions.
Yeah, that could be
Like
confusing.
the emotions need to be self-centered. What does it mean they're not self-centered if usually emotions come about with triggers, with some situations, or there are the emotions that come about maybe without situations, but it still kind of feels self-centered to be in them.
Uh-huh.
Or like kind of selfish in a sense, or maybe to be them with them too long. But then part of compassion is having self-compassion to yourself, to experience them, to be able to climb the pole and then go down. But I'm like so confused. I don't know what is selfish, what is not selfish, what is form or not form.
Well, when we're selfish, it leads to more suffering. That's kind of the way you can tell. If what you're doing is leading to more suffering, then the Buddha is simply saying, don't do it. Do something else, try something else out and see. But emotions are tricky. And we could also say that emotions are connected to needs. So the example I often use is if you're a parent is up waiting for their teenager to come home, and they were supposed to come home at 10 o'clock, and they come in at 1 a.m. in the morning, and they're drunk and stoned, and you've been waiting the whole time, you're really pissed off. Yeah? You're pissed off. But then if you really sat into the anger, you realize that you're pissed off because you're scared. You're scared for you love your kid, and yeah, they disrespected you as your parent. You could go with that if that's kind of the selfish part side of it. But if you were really paying attention, you notice I have this fear that you're too young. You don't, you're going to do something stupid, and so the emotion is connected to a need I have for your safety, not just my emotion. So the emotions can be multi-layered, I think. It's not just one way to have anger. Anger can come out of compassion too. Anger can be about hard love, seeing something and see that something needs to be cut there. And you do it not out of you don't do it out of anger in the sense that we think of anger, but you do it out of wisdom. You do it out of compassion. So there's, in Tantric Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism, they have two kinds of deities. There's the peaceful deities, like the Taras, and then there's the wrathful deities, which are really scary, angry. And they're both expressions of compassion. The peaceful deity is so peaceful that we can't stand it. We can't stay with it because it's too intimate, too spacious. The wrathful deity is scary because it's getting our attention because we're not paying attention in some way. And the wrathful deity is there to shake us up and say, hey, pay attention. That's also compassion. So if you say that to someone you love and you say it in a skillful way, pay attention, you're going to hurt yourself. That's a kind of tough love. That's a kind of compassion. That's not coming out of a selfish place for me that I need to feel better. It's coming out of a place of wisdom.
Thank you.
But yeah, it's a lot to try to to figure out whether your emotion is good or bad or whatever. There's just emotions, and I think with practice, you start to notice that emotions can have different, they can be different. The same emotion can be have a different valence.
Yeah. Even with kids, like I see what you said about my son, like he, okay, they last short and they're in it, but they're self-centered because I didn't get something, so I get angry. They just get, like when you were talking about claiming the space, I mean, from my son, I learned, how do you really claim the space for your anger? Because he feels it with every cell in his body, or even joy or love. So, but it is kind of self-centered, but it's true. There is truth in it, though.
Yeah, well, I'm not a parent, so you're asking the wrong person.
I'm just.
I don't know how parents do what they do. I don't know how you survive as a parent with teenagers. I just don't know how you do it.
I don't know either. I just go with the flow. Nothing works. Like no. Actually, this when we talk about constructs or whatever constructs I will have, it didn't work, and that kind of got me into thinking maybe I don't know.
Well, I think there's a tension in parenting, isn't there, where you're able to be with your kids and help them deal with difficult emotions, and then there's a point where you just get fed up with your kid and you say, well, you're on your own, you have to do that too. You're kind of letting go and letting them, because they have to, it's their karma after all. You're not responsible for everything they do. So there's that's a duality right there. You're teaching them how to be with difficult emotions, and good parenting is, I think, helping kids meet their needs, that their needs are okay and they're lovable. But also good parenting is letting go and saying, I'm fed up with you, man. I'm not gonna, you go out, go play with your friends, get out of the house, leave me alone. That's also part of good parenting, is you're kind of putting them out, cutting the cord. I think it's both. And so that's a duality.
Yeah.
If you hang on to either side, it ends up being kind of unhealthy.
Makes a lot of sense.
So you're close and you're intimate and you're distancing at the same time. It's an odd thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Movement.
Yeah. But I'm not a parent, so I can talk about these things really cavalier, because say, oh yeah, do it this. I'm not a parent. So you shouldn't listen to me.
No, I like listening.
Anyone else?
You.
Okay, it's time for lunch. Thank you, everyone online. We'll see you at 3, and then we'll have council at 7 tonight. You're all welcome to join us for council.